Hi everybody, this is Scott Mason with another chess video for the Contra Costa Chess Club. Today I'm going to go over my very recent game with Grandmaster Walter Browne. I played at the National Game-in-30 Championship from Pleasanton, California, just this last weekend, sponsored by Bay Area Chess. I was very fortunate in my first game and got a win against a 2300 player, with black nonetheless. So my second round I got paired up even more and got to play against Grandmaster Walter Browne. This is the first time I played an actual tournament game against a Grandmaster, so I was just happy not to completely embarrass myself. For those who aren't aware of Walter Browne's great history, I think he was U.S. champion at least 6 times, and just recently had a book come out which I strongly encourage you to pick up if you haven't. It's called The Stress of Chess and Its Infinite Finesse. Very good book, where he excellently annotates 101 of his best games throughout his career, and along with some narrative about his playing career and poker career. Anyway, so as I get into the game, those who know anything about Walter Browne knows that for a long, long time he was a strong advocate for the Sicilian Najdorf. In fact, there's a variation called the Browne variation named after him. Unfortunately, he surprised me in this opening. Not necessarily unfortunately, but he surprised me in this opening by playing a different line. So let's go through the game here. So I'm white, so I played e4, and he played c5. Knight f3, going for the main line, and he plays knight c6. So we're obviously not going towards a Najdorf. Wasn't quite sure what he is heading towards, but he's an expert pretty much on anything Sicilian, so we'll see what happens. So I go for the main line in this line here, d4, pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn. He develops knight f6, knight c3. And he plays e5, and now we're heading towards a Sveshnikov. So I continue with the main line. Really, the first number of moves here are fairly booked. I'd say, long-term strategy here for white is that black has now weakened the d5 square. So ultimately, you want to trade off the 2 knights and the light-squared bishop and leave yourself with a knight, so that you have a good knight versus a bad bishop. So that's the ideal, and that's what we're heading towards here. So as you kind of see how play unfolds, that's kind of the main strategy for white in this type of a position. All right, so got to move the knight its attack. So we got knight on b to d5. Black doesn't want to allow the knight in on d6 with check, so plays d6 to prevent that. Again, I want to trade off the knight on f6, so we play bishop to g5 with the intent of taking it. White kicks the knight on b5. Rather than taking it immediately, actually, alright, so knight goes back to a3, and then b5, and then after that we're going to, the threat being b4, but first we're going to play bishop takes f6, g takes f6, and now the knight hops into d5. Of course, it's difficult to keep it there. Anyway, black continues with development with bishop g7. I play c3 to keep the knight out of the key squares here on b4 and d4, d4 being the more concerning one, and also to prevent b4 coming in. Alright, then black hits the center with f5. And at this point is about where I'm at the end of my book, or at least what I remembered up through the game. I've been to this position in a few games previously. Quite a few, actually. Anyway, so the next thing to do here for white is and I found this during the game, is the main line's bishop d3 to protect the pawn. Black develops with bishop e6. Knight goes to c2, coming back to the center, and hopefully, eventually lending more support to the d5 knight. Black castles, white castles, and then black's king runs to the corner with the idea of obviously using this open g-file at some point down the road to attack white. So I decided to play a4 and try to get some activity on the other side of the board, and so he takes the pawn, rook takes the pawn, and a5 is played. And up to this point, this has all been, I guess you could say, book, although as I said, I was out of what I knew quite a few moves ago. This has been following Jursic versus Stopa from 2001. I have no idea what country that's from. I don't think I had those details. Anyway, at this point I played a quote-unquote new move, at least it's not in my database, and the move I played was queen to h5. The point of this move is that black has a lot of pieces over on the king side and potential for attack with, the, as I said, the rook to g8 and coming down the g file. So I wanted to keep his queen out on that side of the board. So the whole point was essentially to proactively keep the queen out. So at this point, Walter played pawn takes pawn, and there are a couple. You can take back one of two ways. I chose in the game to play bishop takes pawn, but that was not the best way to go. So, interesting story. After the game, I'm standing over by the wall chart, and Grandmaster Selivano, sorry if I butchered his name a little bit there, he came up and gave me some thoughts and analysis on the game, and this was the first position where he discussed what he was considering here, and he said, asked me if I had looked at rook takes e4. So, and then having not really, he probably glanced at the game and he could still remember the exact position, so that was quite impressive. That's why he's a grandmaster, right? So the correct way would be the correct way to continue would be something like f5 and rook h4, and then even though the knight's hanging on d5, I've still got a little bit of a tempo and can then do something with it later, such as after h6 to block the mate, rook on c back over to e3 to hold the knight, and things are probably fairly even here. However, and as I say, going back a couple of moves, if instead of playing f5, black tries playing bishop takes d5, then white can play rook takes e5 because of the mate threat on h7, and so then f5 to block, and then we pick up the bishop, and now white is actually better. So, and this was the analysis that he reeled off the top of his head more or less after thinking about it for a few moments, having just glanced at the board. It's really pretty impressive I felt so anyway. Anyway, so in the game I had a different idea in mind. So I played bishop takes e4, and then of course he plays h5 to kick the bishop, and if I move the bishop to f3, he's gonna play e4, and I'm gonna lose a piece. So instead I decided to move the knight out of the way to f6, threatening mate on h7, so he's got to do something about that. An alternate route to go here, which was what Houdini suggested, would be to go to f4, and if pawn takes, bishop takes the knight on c6, which is hanging, rook goes to c8. Yeah, I mean, ultimately the problem in all these lines, bishop comes to e3, and it's got the double attack on the rook and the knight. Anyway, so queen goes back to e2, the bishop comes into b3, knight goes to a1, attacking the bishop. Great square for the knight. Bishop takes the rook, bishop takes bishop, and say queen comes out to b6. And black's got a clear advantage here, besides having an exchange. It's going to be very challenging for white to get that knight back into play quickly, amongst other things. So, alright, going back to the game. So again, I played knight f6. He played rook takes, which is the best move by far. Bishop takes the knight, and then I brought the rook over to attack the bishop. I chose to, I need to keep the bishop, as if at all possible, on the rook on a4, so that at least I'm only dropping an exchange and not a whole piece. So I brought the bishop to b5 to do that. He plays his bishop into b3. It's smarter, well, better to save the knight at this point, so I play knight to e3. He went back to b8 with the rook, and I went to c6, because again I've got to try to keep on that rook on a4. And at this point he played rook to b6 after the game, or Walter Browne suggested that perhaps queen c8 or queen c7 here would have been the stronger route to go. Anyway, sorry. So rook to b6 was played, and what I chose to do here was not a good move, actually, as Houdini pointed out. So after knight goes to d5, presumably forking the two rooks and hopefully forcing the trade of the bishop for the knight, or at the very least, I get a rook for 2 pieces, which is what happened in the game. That's I felt that was at least worth a shot. The correct move here, though, which just flat out wins, would be rook to h6, because after the queen move, then you basically get the bishop for free. So I was very lucky that Grandmaster Browne did not see that during the game. And so anyway, going back, so after that, he played rook takes bishop, knight takes rook, bishop takes bishop, and now I get a little kind of cute move in because of the if the queen's not on the back rank here, I've got this fork, so I can get away with rook takes a5. So queen takes a5, queen d8 check, king to g7, queen takes c6. And then at this point, the 2 bishops versus the rook is much stronger, so Grandmaster Browne played queen to c5 in hopes to trade off the queens. I went to b7 check, which is, forking the bishop and the king, so he's got to play bishop back to f7. I played h3 to give my king a little bit of breathing room in case I can get my rook out and into play. He played e4. And I played rook to a1. May or not be particularly good, and then he played a very strong move, which made me think for a bit here with rook to bishop to h4, and I have to return back to protect the f2 square with rook to f1. Anyway, so then he starts moving his king in, king to g6. I decided that the only way I'm ever getting my rook or anything else back into play here, since I'm pretty much tied up, is to allow the trade-off of queens. So I played queen to b4, and he took, and I recaptured. And he plays bishop to c4, and at this point, at least per Houdini, black's got a clear advantage, and I would absolutely agree with that. So rook goes to d1, and he plays d5, and then I get in b5, because again, the main strategy when you're behind is you want to trade pawns and not pieces, so I'm doing everything in my power to follow basic principles here, and I'm very happy if he plays bishop takes the pawn and I take on d5. That didn't happen in the game, though. He instead played the bishop back to d8 to cover the pawn's advance. I played b3. The whole point of b3 is that if he takes the pawn on b3, then I can get over to b1 and get behind this pass pawn and actually push it forward and probably win one of the bishops. So he didn't take it. He played bishop to d3 instead, and this is where I went awry. And again, this is the other place where Grandmaster Sevillano gave me some advice here or some thoughts, and the correct move here. And at that point, black's still better, but at least I have some holding chances. Is to play rook to c1 and to the bishop can't take the pawn on b5 because the rook will come to c5 and pick up the d pawn. And if all things being equal, I can possibly even get b6 in here, because if he can't take it with the bishop because of the rook c6 check, winning the bishop. So again, it would have at least given him something to think about. However, that wasn't the route I went, and I'll go through the rest of the game here fairly quickly, because I just, my thought process unfortunately was, hey, my king, how am I going to get my king into play here? What do I need to do that? And maybe trade some more pawns, etc. So I played g3, which is unfortunately, again, the rook needs to be more active. The king, although difficult to get in the game, isn't really in a place where it's not going to be able to help much. So after g3, he plays king to f6 to get the king into the game, king to g2, king to e5, f3. He plays pawn to d4. Really, the d pawn is what's winning this game for him, more or less. Well as eventually your 2 pass pawns. I played g4 again with the idea of trying to trade off pawns here, but we're both down to, you know, a few minutes in time here. So he now takes the pawn on b5. I took the pawn on f5. He plays e3. And now he's got two connected passers that are just going to crush me like a fly. So I played f4 check, and he played. Again, I'm hoping to lure the king away so I can grab the d pawn here. And he played king to e4. Solid. Rook went over to a1 to try to get some activity somewhere. He plays e2. He played king f2, and now he plays bishop h4 check. And I resigned here because it's pretty obvious I'm losing the rook, amongst other things. He's probably queen anyway. And actually, Houdini points out that there's after rook h4, it's actually like mate in about 8 moves, and that line would go king g2, d3, f6, d2, f7, d1 queen, rook takes queen, pawn takes rook and queens, pawn queens, but hey, it doesn't matter if I got a queen or not, because unfortunately I'm getting mated very quickly. Queen to f3, king to g1, bishop f2 check, king to h2, queen to g3 check, king h1, and queen g1 mate. So that would be the way it should end. And again, I resigned after the bishop h4 check. So anyway, it was an exciting game overall, and a lot of fun to play, and again, it was nice to be able to play against my first Grandmaster in a tournament game. So, and I couldn't have been more fortunate than to get to play some as legendary as Grandmaster Walter Browne. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. It's a little longer than my normal. So anyway, thanks.